In Colorado, currently our pension has an assumed rate of return of 7.25%,
Mhm.
which means there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out how much it costs to buy service credit, but that's a big part of it. In effect, this is simplifying a little bit, but in effect, when you're buying years in Colorado, you're guaranteeing yourself a 7.25% return for the rest of your life.
Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Shaun Morgan, a full-time teacher. That's right, I teach every day just like you, and personal financial coach. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights or a new educator navigating your first paycheck to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life. The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. I'm super excited to have Karl Fisch on the show today. If you haven't heard that name before, he is someone who's been around the block a few times when it comes to finance for teachers. He taught mathematics and computer science for over 30 years and served as a director of technology for Arapahoe High School in Middleton, Colorado. And then he is serving on benefits committee negotiations and became the person that people asked about financial questions in his school. You might be that person in your school. Through that, he just started to learn and ended up serving on the Colorado PARA Board of Trustees, which is the public employee pension system in Colorado. And now he's retired, but he's still in the personal finance literacy for educators space with a blog and with doing books on the different pension systems of states around the United States. And a few city pension plans as well. So if you want to know anything about pensions and educators with their money, Karl is the guy to talk to, and I'm super excited to have him on the show today. Karl, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction, but I'll do my best.
I'm sure that you will. I'm sure that you will. And diving right into that, you are the mind and the author behind the series TLDR on pension plans. And let's all be honest, we didn't read our pension plans when we signed up.
What?
So what inspired you to write those books?
Well, maybe just a little backstory. When I was in high school, I had a part-time job in a credit union, kind of, got me interested in finances a little bit. Ended up becoming a teacher of mathematics. And so, I had an interest in numbers and stuff. So kind of got interested in finance. Back in the 1990s, that meant, reading magazines. For the younger folks out there, these are things that were printed on paper and, you got mailed to you, you paid money for. And books, particularly some books by a guy named John Bogle that everybody called Jack, but learned some from that. And then as we moved into the 2000s, that changed to books and blogs and podcasts and all sorts of good stuff. As you mentioned in the intro, ended up serving on benefits committee for my district and negotiations a little bit. And so learned a little bit more about stuff there, about how it worked within our school district. And then just because as part of that, had conversations with my colleagues, I figured out that there was a lot of financial knowledge that at that point I thought was, more or less common sense, not that people thought about it maybe as much as I did, but that it wasn't like any weird things that were out there that people wouldn't know. And after talking to my colleagues, it turned out that whether it's common sense or not, they didn't know it. And as a result, we're often making or more often not making financial decisions. And the ones they were make weren't particularly optimal for them or in their best interests, often with the quote unquote advice of people who maybe weren't looking out for their best interests. So I started informally helping folks in my building. As you mentioned, I ended up serving 3 years on the PARA Board of Trustees until I retired. So I had to step down from that seat. And so when I did retire, I saw this huge need, also for our students, by the way, as a whole separate topic. And so I still kind of worked with my educator friends, not financial advice. I am not definitely not a financial advisor, but I think of it myself as a financial educator. I was trying to just help them learn more about their finances, kind of give them ideas about some things they should think about. And I certainly had opinions about what they should do, but just trying to lay it out so they can make their own decisions. And then that spread beyond just people I knew and word of mouth, that kind of stuff. And so I was feeling good about that. Felt like I was helping some people. Really hard to scale that. There's one of me. And so I thought, well, maybe I can write a little book that would kind of sum that up and more people could get that I wouldn't necessarily have to talk with everybody. Um, but I also knew that my audience was people who typically wouldn't read a financial book, right? That's kind of why they're in this position. So it kind of came up with that idea of the TLDR, that if I could write something short enough, and straightforward enough that people who really weren't interested in this would read it, I would do that. So I wrote the Colorado book, got a decent reception from the tens and tens of people who bought it in Colorado. Um, and then went on the Teach and Retire Rich podcast, and they said, without warning me, that, hey, you should write one of these for all 50 states. And I said, well, that'd be a great idea, but I don't feel like I know enough about all 50 states. They said, well, just get a co-author from each state. So that actually sounded like a pretty good idea. So we're now on book 33 that I'm working on, or actually book 34. We got 33 out. I'm working on Connecticut at the moment.
We're gonna talk mostly about pensions, but is there a reason why Connecticut's number 30, the 34 instead of higher up on the list?
It's truly based on co-authors that step forward. So it had nothing to do, it's not like I went through and said, let's do the biggest states first or whatever. It's truly like, hey, somebody from Connecticut's wanting to help me out, then I'll do it. And so for the states we haven't done, it's not anything holding anything against those states, just looking for local co-authors who know that pension, know how schools work in the state, know how taxes work in that state, because I can do all the reading, and I do. When I write these books, I do all the research, I write the draft, but then I can run it through my co-author to make sure I don't really screw something up that is obvious to people living there, but for somebody living in Colorado wouldn't know. So if any of your listeners look at the list of books and say, hey, we don't have one for my state and want to be a co-author, reach out to me. That's all it takes. And it's not a huge time commitment on their part. Probably depends how much they get into it, but could be as short as 8 to 10 hours of work. Could be longer, and then we can hopefully at some point reach the goal that the Teach and Retire Rich podcast guys thought we should do, which is all 50 states, which is actually more than 50 states because there are a few city pension plans as well. So
That's awesome. Well, I wish you best of luck on that, and hopefully we'll get some more people to reach out and co-author with you.
all right.
All right, so you wrote this, series of books to help people understand their pension. That's really what it is, because pension's huge, and that's obviously an important part of an educator's finances. So how are pensions different than other traditional retirement options? And what I mean by that is, how should we think about it, the impact it's going to have on the way that we're approaching our retirement and our financial decision making compared with those options?
Right. So the books really are, they're titled personal financial literacy for educators, and then specifically then references their pension system. So it is more than just about the pension system. It's trying to bring it together kind of holistically. But one of the things that I discovered through this my journey of getting however I got here, was that we live in a great age in the sense of there is a ton of fantastic financial advice that you can get for free, right? Online through books. Some also not so great financial advice you can get in those places, but for the most part, really accessible. It's never been easier to learn this stuff. The problem, or maybe the challenge, is that for so much of it, it's geared towards people who don't have a pension. And because, relatively speaking, we're a minority out there. There's a lot of people don't receive pensions anymore. And so the old idea of the three-legged stool of pension, Social Security, and your personal savings for most people is now 401k and Social Security. It's kind of a two-legged stool. And so for those of us with pensions, they often aren't mentioned. It's kind of like a throwaway line. Like you'll be listening to podcasts or reading a blog post and they'll say, oh, and they'll go through this whole thing and then they'll say, oh, and if you have a pension, you might want to do something a little differently. And then they just move on, right? They don't say what you should do differently, because that's not really their target audience, right? Especially because a lot of these folks are writing for, folks with a little more higher net worth than a lot of educators have. Um, and so it's a really different, it really should um, change people's entire approach, not only to retirement, but for their finances throughout their life. Because it's guaranteed income for life, which Social Security is as well. Often with the cost of living increase, it depends on your pension plan. But it typically starts so much earlier than Social Security, right? The full retirement age these days is 67 for folks for Social Security. For folks who can afford to, you should wait till 70 often to do that. And the very earliest you can get is 62. But for a lot of educators in the prime of their careers right now, they can retire easily, well, easily in the sense of their pension, in their late 50s. And even though retirement benefits for newer hires are often not quite as good, still can often do it by your late 50s or early 60s, much earlier than Social Security. So there's a whole different set of opportunities and challenges for educators because, you know, typical Social Security person, you're already on Medicare, right? When you do that. So health insurance, while not cheap when you're on Medicare, is a lot less expensive. You also have fewer years, not to be morbid, but fewer years between retiring and dying that you have to worry about. Whereas folks who are retiring younger have those gap years before they get Social Security, as well as there are a lot of pension systems that we don't, like in Colorado, we don't pay into Social Security. So we don't get Social Security, except some of us have enough credits from like working in high school and college that we might get some, although reduced by WEP and GPO. And so there's just so many things that are different about how you should approach that. Just one example, again, is a lot of, not all, but a lot of pension plans allow you to purchase additional service credit. So the typical way of earning service credit is, right, you teach a year or you work in some other educational capacity for a year and you get a year of service credit and that adds up and eventually that's how your pension. But often you can purchase additional service credit. Sometimes it can just be you can purchase a couple of years just for no reason. Other times you have to have work history under a Social Security job to qualify, or maybe teaching out of state or something like that. But that's a huge option, because like in the private sector, again, going back to folks on Social Security, one of the big topics of conversation out there in the financial blogosphere, if you will, is this idea of, okay, they retire and they have this big 401k, hopefully big 401k and IRA. How do they turn that into annuity, right? How do they turn that into yearly income that's going to provide for their needs, but also last their entire life? Well, your pension is an annuity. And if you buy years, you're actually purchasing an additional annuity. But the difference is when people in the private sector are purchasing an annuity, they're purchasing from an insurance company that has to make money off of them. When you buy it from your pension plan, they don't have to make money off you. So you're basically buying an annuity at cost. We have what all those people in the private sector would love to have. And then there's all sorts of stuff around optimizing their highest average salary. That's what we call it in Colorado. Different people call it final average salary or lots of different things. Things around salary schedule, things around asset allocation, but also just being aware of the details of their pension. Because while pensions have a lot in common, again, written 33 books so far, they have a lot in common, but each one is also very specific and has different details. And people are just shocked when they find out, oh, wait, your pension doesn't do that? No, you really need to understand your pension, not just pensions in general.
Yeah, pensions are tricky. They're sticky businesses. I've been a part of 2.5 pensions, and each one is different, and within each pension there's different tiers and levels. So there's a lot to figure out. It's just that's why it's too long and you didn't read it, right?
That's why somebody needs to write a book.
Yeah, someone. And if you're in one of those states, make sure you reach out to Karl. I love how you talked about this need in this space for understanding pensions, because this is one of my top reasons for starting this podcast. Is I listen to financial education podcasts all the time and I go, that's great, but it doesn't apply to me because I'm a teacher, right? It's just there's so many things about teaching that don't fit in with the now traditional mold of
Yes.
of preparing for retirement, because we don't have the 401k that most people do. We have 403b, but that's different. You got to be
Yep.
careful with the 403b. We may or may not have social security depending on the system that you're
Yep.
in, or you'll have social security and your pension, but also like some weird rules like you were talking about that you need to be aware of, because if you're expecting to get both in their full amount and then you don't, that can be a problem.
Right.
But people don't talk about those on podcasts where they aren't talking about pensions. So
Right.
there's so many different little rules to be aware of when you have a pension. And then I just, my last favorite thing, when I read the book that the Teach and Retire Rich book that they put
Mhm.
out, that Dan Otto wrote. And my favorite part of that book is where it talked about how our pension is an annuity. So the fact that all these people are coming in and trying to sell us an annuity in our 403b is nonsensical, because we already have one.
Right.
We don't need an additional insurance annuity on top of
Right.
that.
Or if you do want an annuity, look at purchasing service credit, because again, you're buying it at cost. You're not paying those insane fees that the 403b companies are charging you. And just as an example, again, this varies on your pension system, but in Colorado, currently our pension has an assumed rate of return of 7.25%,
Mhm.
which means there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out how much it costs to buy service credit, but that's a big part of it. In effect, this is simplifying a little bit, but in effect, when you're buying years in Colorado, you're guaranteeing yourself a 7.25% return for the rest of your life. Right? Now, yes, conceivably you could invest on your own and make more than that, but I don't know any financial, like a real financial advisor, not me, any real financial advisor who said, here is a guaranteed investment that'll pay you 7.25% until you die. Are you going to turn that down? No way, right?
Yeah.
But people don't think of it that way. And so again, it's a totally different mindset and totally different considerations that even unfortunately many financial advisors aren't aware of, because again, they don't work with a lot of folks with pensions.
Well, yeah, like what you're saying, the problem is the population is so small with pensions that
Right.
that's just not where the money is for advising. That's not where people are making money in their content creation,
Yes.
because we don't have a ton of people with pensions. So it's
Wait,
important.
you're not making money with your content creation, Shaun? I thought I'm looking at your mansion behind you, so
Yes,
you're
yes. For all of you
yes,
can see, my wonderful home office. That's also where I teach my remote classroom from. Is very high tech and nice.
very swanky.
The Lamborghini's outside, right?
Yes, that's good. We'll take a look at it later.
So you're speaking my language right now. I'm thinking this is fantastic. So we have these pensions, and we want to make sure that we are not just being like, oh yeah, I have a pension, I guess it'll be there, but we want
Right.
to make sure that we are maximizing that and using it to full effect. So we have these years of service and education level and stipend levels and all these different, like are you teaching math or not, that go into how much
Yep.
money you're getting every single year for your salary. How does that impact your pension? What should you think about when you're working on maximizing your salary schedule? Can you just talk to us about those lanes and
Yes.
steps and all those things that go into maximizing our pension?
So believe it or not, there's a blog post for that. So if I don't know if you put links with your podcast, but I can send that along if you want it. But yeah, so one of the things, so in addition to helping folks trying to understand their finances and this little book project, I also teach a personal financial literacy class for Colorado educators for the same reason, trying to reach more folks. It's an online platform. They can do it on their own time, although we try to keep it relatively synchronous in terms of the same topics, but they can work on it whatever time of day they want. It's not face to face. And so one of the things we talk about is salary schedules, right? Which is something that not every school district has, by the way, but most do, or at least most that I've come across do. And fairly typical thing that happens is when a new teacher starts, the veteran teacher pulls them aside and says, you want to move across that salary schedule as fast as you possibly can. right? That's standard advice. It was told to me when I started. I told it to new folks when they started. I'm sure it's still told to new folks today. I certainly mention it in the class, but and in the books. But again, somebody who's first starting teaching, whether they're 22, 23, right out of school, or they're teaching as their second career, when they first start teaching, it's not necessarily, retirement is not at the top of their mind. I would argue that it shouldn't be maybe at the top of their mind, but it should be at least a portion of their mind. But one of the things that I struggled with is everybody's told that, but a lot of people don't actually do that, or at least they don't do it very quickly. And towards the end of their career, they say, why didn't I do that? Um, and so instead of just telling, I wondered if there was a way I could show them, right? And so that led to that blog post, which is basically, it's a spread. I mean, it's a narrative, and then it links to a spreadsheet that took a salary schedule from a typical school district here in Colorado. It's not one of the highest paying school districts. It's not one of the lowest paying school districts. It's kind of in the middle. And it literally takes their salary schedule and then looks at three different things. First, it looks at your cumulative salary over how many every year career you want to have. And so, as you know, in most salary schedules, you get a raise when each year as you go up a step, and you get raises if you move horizontally through additional education. And so what it does is it sums up the columns for all the different lanes of education. So you see the difference between, well, if you spent your entire career in just the bachelor's lane, this is how much you would make over a 30-year career, or whatever number you want to put in. It's got all the years. You can stop it wherever you want. But if you make it to MA plus 60, or whatever your highest one is in your district, this is what it is. Now, in reality, very few, if any, teachers, unless they start in the highest lane, aren't going to stay in the same lane their whole career. But definitely some teachers only move over a little bit versus teachers who move over a lot and quickly, as well as there's typically in most districts a hard break between bachelor's plus whatever and master's. And if you don't get your master's, then you stop. And so there's one spreadsheet that looks at the cumulative totals that shows how much more you make by moving on over on the salary schedule. Then there's a second piece of that, because your pension is typically based, again, on some formula where the highest average salary or final average salary comes into play. And so by moving over on the salary schedule, if you max it out by the end, you're making more. And so it also means that not only did you make literally hundreds of thousands, sometimes even over $1 million more in your career by moving over, but your pension might be $30,000 more a year for the rest of your life because you moved over. And then the third piece of it, because this came up a lot in the class, is one of the strategies that we talk about is teachers say, well, it's hard to have extra money set aside to invest. And we talk a lot about spending and a lot of other things, but one of the things is, well, there's a technique that a lot of people use, which is invest half your raises, right? As teachers, one advantage we have, which some people may not see as an advantage, but we kind of know what our salaries are going to look like, right? We have a salary schedule. We know next year what we're going to make, plus a small cost of living adjustment to the salary schedule itself. Plus, if we move over, we can see that number. So if you're going to make $1,500 more next year, commit to, okay, allow yourself to spend $750 more next year, but then invest the other half, invest $750. So again, with this typical Colorado school district, I did that. I simply went through and said, what if you invest half your raise? And it gets a spreadsheet, so it calculates it all for you. And again, the cumulative amount that you would have at the end of a, let's say, 30-year career, again, you can pick whatever number you want, is really kind of amazing. And then the differential between what that looks like if you stayed in bachelor's or bachelor's plus 15 or bachelor's plus 30 versus if you're over here in MA plus 60 is, again, humongous. So part of the part of the blog post title is your $1 million or 2 or 3 decision, because it really is, between those three things, it could easily be several $1 million difference over the course of your career by something that most people intuitively know, but seeing it is like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think that's so important that we're putting hard values to it. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to make an extra $1,000 next year if I move over.
Right.
Which if you look at it is like a few dozen dollars each paycheck, you're like, woohoo,
Yep.
like it's really not that exciting in that moment. But cumulatively, if you keep just, moving up and you keep popping over, that huge impact over the course of your career. But then it's something that even I hadn't thought of is the fact that you've moved over so much can make your pension so much bigger because they're
Yep.
looking only at your final like
Mhm.
3 to 5 years of salary, not at your, over
Right.
the
Your
course of your
total.
whole
Mhm.
career. That makes a huge impact. I mean, even
Yeah.
if you are late in your career and you're like, why would I go and get education? I'm almost done. It's not going to make an
Right.
impact. If you are, more than 5 years out from retiring, hopping over those last couple of lanes can make a huge difference
Yep.
for your long-term pension because you have this final 3 to 5 years
Yeah.
average going up so much.
Well, and the other thing I think this post and the spreadsheet shows is again the power of compound interest. So the invest half your raises thing, like you said, some people are like, well, another $1,000. Sure, I'd like to have another $1,000 next year, but it's only 1,000. It's not that much. But when you look at, okay, invest 500 of it and then keep doing half of your raise each year, then wow, I'm going to retire with $1 million. And again, it demonstrates visually the impact of that compound interest that people just don't. I mean, humans are linear thinkers, right? We aren't exponential thinkers. And so it's really tough for us to really understand that. And just I want to mention too that spreadsheet that's out there, they can make a copy of it and put in their own salary schedule, right? That's what it says in the blog post. That do you file, make a copy? It's a Google spreadsheet, and then just replace the salary schedule that's there with yours, and then it'll automatically calculate the rest for you. You might have to change the formula for your pension as well on the pension tab, because obviously mine is for Colorado's pension and your formula might be a little bit different, but that's relatively easy to do. And I'm happy to help anybody who wants to do that. But for the just straight, how much more will you make cumulatively? Just plug in your own salary schedule. And again, it's all in today's dollars. You don't have to worry about, well, what's the salary schedule going to be like in 25 years? The way the spreadsheet is designed, it's all in today's dollars. You put in exactly today's salary schedule because we know that inflation is going to happen and salaries are going to be inflated, but then what they buy, also what you're going to buy with that money also inflates. So by keeping in today's dollars, we can really, the numbers there are all relatively close to today's purchasing power, right? Assuming, which is a little bit of an assumption, but assuming that teacher salary schedules generally keep up with inflation over time. So everything stays in today's dollars. So it's not like you're saying, oh, I'm gonna have $1 million, but it's only gonna buy me 250,000. No, that's $1 million in today's dollars.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just for anyone who wants to, access that, I will have a link to this blog post in our show
Great.
notes. You can go to teachermoneyshow.com/podcast to find that. And we'll have the links to all
And
the show notes there
And
for
again, I want to be clear that there's nothing like amazing this blog post or some secret I've discovered. And it's a secret that a lot of people know. It's not really a secret, but again, it was just trying a way to visually show people in a way that would hit them who aren't spreadsheet people, right? Who don't understand compound interest or just maybe they understand it, but it's like, yeah, fine, but I have lesson plans to do for tomorrow, And so this is a quick hit of like, oh, okay, well, next time I do have some time, I should sit down and figure out my salary schedule and how I can move across it quickly if I want to. Again, as I think I say in the blog post, it's not all about the money, right? There's more to life than money. Um, and so there are trade-offs and balance you want to find in your life. But most teachers are taking continuing education anyway to keep their certificate up in line, up to date. Most teachers are taking stuff to hopefully become better educators. And so why not do that? It just again gives them a little bit of a financial incentive, if you will, that it shows them, oh, this is really worth it. Not just, yeah, I'm sure it's worth it, but no, this is really worth it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. There's another thing that I'm wondering about, and you might not be able to speak to this if you haven't done research on it or anything, but when we are moving over that salary schedule, it requires education, right? So paying for a master's degree is usually not cheap. So if you have to get student loans, does that negate the positive impacts you're getting from that, or how would that impact, long-term thinking wise? Initially you say, yeah, I'm putting a lot of money into this, and there's, if I get student loans, there's going to be interest to pay on that. That's short term, and so looking at that, but also the long term.
That's a great question. So, I mean, there's multiple pieces to that answer. There's always trade-offs, right? But the math does work out, and it works out the best the earlier you do it, right? So if you do it earlier in your career, then the math works out even better. If it's later in your career, there does come a point where there may be diminishing returns from that. But one of the ways we talk about it in the class I teach is think of taking additional classes as your side hustle. And instead of getting paid for your side hustle now, you're actually paying for your side hustle, but you're getting paid for it later through salary increases, and getting paid even later through a vastly larger pension. And so, yes, there is cost, and there are some ways to deal with that. Some places, some school districts or schools have some tuition reimbursement things, those kind of things. Of course, there's tax breaks for it. You can use $529 for it, or there's the lifetime learning credit if your income is not too high that you can use to offset some of it. Typically the big cost is a master's. Certainly there are some less expensive masters online that you can find that will help. But one of the great things, well, potentially great things about student loans right now is the SAVE program. So currently tied up in the courts, right? So this is a program that the Biden administration put forward and actually put into effect. And then right now, some folks are suing, and we'll have to see how that plays out. And that will depend somewhat on future elections as well. But if that stays in place, and for the people who are already in it, I can't imagine it will go away. I imagine they'll be legacied into it. It's just new people might not be able to join it. But again, under the SAVE program, it can be really attractive, particularly for young educators, where it's very possible that you could pay $20, $30 a month, sometimes even $0 a month for 10 years and have it forgiven. Again, there's a blog post for that. That's got a nice little spreadsheet that you can put in. And people say, well, my payments would be higher than that. Well, they could be, but typically, if you're a young teacher, you're not making a ton of money. And even if you have a spouse who's making a lot of money, part of one of the big changes of the SAVE program was you could file your taxes separately, and then it'll be just based on your own income, but you can still claim your kids if you have children. And it also does, I don't want to get into the details, but 225% of poverty level is an exclusion from your income. So when you do all the math, like I said, it often comes down to very low payments for 10 years. And you can do some things to affect those payments, like having your insurance premiums come out pre-tax, by contributing to FSAs and HSAs, by contributing to traditional pre-tax 401k, 403b, 457b IRAs. That all lowers your taxable income, so you get tax breaks, but it also lowers your student loan payment. And if you're in PSLF, after 10 years, it's gone, right? It's forgiven. And so it is not inconceivable, but there's a lot of people getting a master's right now that if essentially it will be free, other than the opportunity cost of the money they paid right now, not being invested somewhere. But that they may pay $0 or very little dollars and have it paid for. So I'm hopeful that the litigation will get resolved soon. But it is just a fantastic thing. I've been screaming from the mountaintops to everyone who already has student loans. They should be in this program, and they should understand how it works, because there are ways to really minimize those student loan payments. Again, sometimes all the way down to zero.
Oh, awesome. So it could have a short-term impact. You can negate that short-term impact, but long-term, it makes sense even if you don't negate that short-term impact. So
yes,
that's
and again, it's like any college education, right? If you go to a master's program that, I don't know if there is a master's in education program that costs this much, but it costs 150,000, it's a different calculation than if you're doing one that costs 30,000, or Again, there's some online ones in Colorado that are fairly well recommended that are around 10,000. So just depending on what you want for yourself, as well as what's available to you and what works, that how much that cost is also going to be, part of that calculation. But even for the moderately expensive masters, particularly if you do it earlier in your career, it is definitely going to pay off.
Yeah, and like you said, there are so many options. I don't recommend this necessarily for everyone, but I got my master's degree for $4,000 because I took an online program that let you fit as many classes as possible in 6 months.
Yep.
Paid a flat fee for that 6 months, and I busted out a master's degree in 6 months.
Yep.
And it was really hard, but I did it, and I paid the one flat fee, and I was done. I had a master's degree, and
Yeah, I
then
know some folks in Colorado who've done that as well.
so yeah, there are many ways to do it if you want to, and to get the maximum benefit for the minimum money put into that. So we're coming up on our time here, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I just want to kind of circle back. We've talked about this a little bit, but if you have, you're doing everything you can to make sure your pension's maximized, right? You may or may not have Social Security, depending on if you have, in a state where you contribute, and you have to consider, of course, those exclusions that apply. How would you think about, maximizing your pension while also working with, the 403B, the 457 of the HSA as part of that total plan?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about, salary schedule is a big part of that. Certainly, it depends on how your state treats income for your salary, but in states where they count everything, like in Colorado, if you coach a sport or sponsor an activity or take tickets at the soccer game, that all counts. So, or working summer school, or doing summer curriculum work that you get paid for, that all counts as para-includable salary. So it impacts your highest average salary, which impacts your pension. So certainly, if you have the time and the energy level during those last few years, take advantage of that. There are other decisions around like asset allocation, which again, we don't really have time to dive into tonight, but this is a simplification, but in a lot of ways for a career educator, you can think of your pension as the bond portion of your portfolio. So that allows you to be much more aggressive. And by aggressive, I don't mean that you're, buying GameStop, but that you're investing much more in equities, equity index funds, because unlike folks in the private sector, when you retire, you're not having to live off your 401k, or in our case, often a 403b or a 457b, but you have a pension coming in that is going to cover a lot of your basic living expenses. And then where the 403b or the IRA or the HSA comes in is really going from, okay, I can get by on my pension, but if I want to kind of live the dream in retirement, right, and really live my best life, that's where that money comes in. And understanding asset allocation, and then understanding fees in 403b land, really, really important. Which is what Teach and Retire Rich, Dan and Scott do with 403BYs. They talk about that a lot. And again, educators just don't understand how bad the majority, not all, but the majority of their 403Bs are, and that they need to try to get the best one, or do an IRA instead, or if you're lucky enough to have a good 457, do that. Or like in Colorado and a few other states, we actually do have access to our state 401k. So we actually have access to 401ks, 403bs, and 457s, but we have a state 401k and a state 457. So I don't need a 403b at all if I'm in a district that's opted into the 457. Unfortunately, not every district has, but we have fantastic low fees. But people don't know that, because the people who come to their lounge with free donuts is the 403b reps. And so that's one of the most important and helpful parts of the class I teach, but also one of the most depressing and sad parts when we get to that module, because all these people find out how much money they've left on the table, and actually not left on the table, given to their 403b company over time.
Those free donuts were not free.
Yeah, they were not. They're the most expensive donut you've ever had.
Yeah. Oh man, it hurts my heart every single time. And I could go just off. I have a rant that every time it comes up, I just rant on it. But if you want to hear me rant about the free donuts, I've talked about this many times. One of them was on the episode with Dan Otter. We had him on, talked all about 403Bs with
Yep.
403bys.org. Once again, I'll link to that in the show notes at teachermoneyshow.com/podcast. All right. I've got two more questions for you.
Okay.
The questions I ask every guest. My first one is, what is your number one tip for teachers to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life?
I think I would go with being intentional. It's something we talk a lot about in the teaching world in terms of our teaching, right? But in terms of our finances, it's really like aligning your spending with your values and goals. So we talk about spending a lot in the financial community, in my classes, in the books and stuff. It's not that spending itself is bad, right? Spending is part of life, but it's spending on things that you don't value, that can be bad. Um, I have another blog post, which is a little tongue in cheek, but not really, that says, I can tell you how to be successful financial literacy in one sentence. And the sentence is something I won't get it exactly right because I spent a lot of time making sure every word was the way I wanted it. But financial literacy is spending less than you make on the things that you value and saving, investing the rest in low cost, diversified index funds, selected based on your investment time horizon, right? And there's a lot more detail behind that. But if you're intentional about that, really think about the life you want to live. For so many of us, it was, we went to school, we got our educations, we came out, we got a job, and life just happened to us. And that's totally normal. But if we take a step back and be more intentional about, well, what do I really value? What are my goals? Not just financially, but just for my life. And then aligning what I'm doing with that, being really intentional, taking the time to think about that instead of suddenly waking up and being 50 or 65 or whatever and saying, well, I wish I would have thought about that earlier. It's not rocket science. It's just taking a step back and really thinking about it a little bit. And the earlier you can do that, the much larger impact it will have on your life.
Awesome. Thank you. That is fantastic advice. Intention is probably the most important thing in most aspects of our life. Instead of going around on autopilot, which I feel like the culture of today is just kind of living on autopilot.
Well, and we all do it because, autopilot is good for things we don't want to think about. Or, like if I can't think of the right word, but if we paid 100% attention to everything, we would just be overwhelmed, right? And so people use their intuition and they go with their gut feeling, and there's good evolutionary reasons for that. Not to get off on a totally another topic, but yeah, just being more intentional about the things that really matter is just huge.
Well, you have to be intentional about what you're intentional about too.
Right. Yeah. There you go. Wow. That's meta intentional.
Oh yes, very much so. Anyways, I just think that's one of the most important things, is to realize that where you're focusing and where you're putting your energy needs to be on purpose as much as possible.
Yep. Yep.
All right, and the last question, if someone is just aching to write a TLDR book about their state, or just want to get in contact with you, maybe get help with that spreadsheet, or for any other reason, how can a teacher get in contact with you?
Sure. One place, a one-stop shop that you then can get to me is my blog, which is fishfinancial.org. And it's fish spelled Fisch, financial, all one word.org. Then there's some contact things there. On places like Twitter and Blue Sky and Facebook, I'm Karl Fisch, just all three places. My email is just Karl Fisch, and it's a Gmail account, so they can get a hold of me there. They can search me on Amazon if they really want to find the list of currently 33 books. Hopefully within the next 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be at 34 books. And I can send you that link too if you want to include in the show notes. But the point of this is not to sell books. As I tell my co-authors when they sign up, this is not going to make you independently wealthy. You're going to make tens and tens of dollars because we make a buck or so each sale, and if we sell 10, that's great. That's hopefully some of those lives we influence. We sell 20, that's great. Some books sell more, and certainly in the bigger states, and we reach more people. But again, it's not gonna move you into another tax bracket anytime soon. So it's not about that. It really is. They're very inexpensive. It's $5 for Kindle, $8 for paperback. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. And so it's really just designed to get the information out, because it can really make such a huge difference, particularly for younger teachers. Certainly it can have a bigger impact, but no matter where you are in your career, it can make a big difference. In my class, I've had somebody as young as 24 and somebody as old as 62. And pretty universally, they're all saying, yeah, I got a lot out of this. So.
Awesome. That is incredible. I'm so glad you have that resource available, and I hope that you get tens of sales
All right,
from
that'd be good. Well, I hope we get one or two authors, hopefully spread out, not all tomorrow, but and we'll work through it. But if I get them all tomorrow, that's great. I'll just queue them up and we'll get to it as I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karl, for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun talking to you, and I
Great,
really
thanks.
appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing with this, helping educate teachers about their finances.
Are you worried you won't have enough money to retire? Or maybe you just don't know how you're going to get out of all of this debt? Whatever your situation is, I can help you. Go to teachermoneyshow.com/guest and fill out the form there. Then you can come on the show for free coaching, or we can meet one-on-one to discuss your needs. I look forward to talking to you.